Ooh, I wanna think too that the ant, whenever he eats people, he can probably gain their ability as well. When he ate the healer's head, he gained the ability to regenerate himself too. I got it. I got it. That's a good. That is a good predict right there. AniNews. AniNews, boy. AniNews. I cannot give you enough props, bro. Thank you for the cut content, missed content, any way you want to put it. I'm so glad I stumbled on your videos.
I guess Solo Leveling really knows what the fans want. What could have been an emotional scene highlighting what's at stake and the diminishing faith Korea has in its hunters was instead a Sakuga-filled anime original scene of Cha fighting the Ant Queen. Both would have been pretty awesome, but you know as much as I do, one appeals more to the mainstream than the other. That being the case, allow me to build up that tension and set the tone for you, since a lot of the little scenes which do exactly that were left out. We'll also go through how it is the raid really went down, since there's a bit more to be said from both the Korean and Japanese side. So, just as we do every week, here's everything that didn't make it into the anime. There's only a few days left to secure the new designs to be cooked up. We're closing the store for
Cop the merch.
Monday, so if you were interested in any of these subtle nods to Solo Leveling, be sure to get one now before they're gone forever. They're all sourced locally and made in-house, so you can trust the material, print quality, and durability are the best they can be. So, whether it's Iron's shield, Igris's sword, or Sung's daggers, you can carry that Shadow Army aesthetic pretty much anywhere. Just click the link down below to check them out. But anyway, episode 23. It's going to get even more intense, covering chapters 96 to 100 from the manhwa and chapters 115 to 118 from the web novel. Let's start things off at the beginning of Raid Day, where numerous warships would be deployed all from the coasts of China, Taiwan, Japan, and Korea. Despite half those countries not being involved, it seems others were preparing for the worst. Korea naturally had several contingencies in place too, part of which was the large number of hunters stationed to the south. They were ready for any ants that might have fled to the mainland. This is because, even in the case of a successful mission, there was a good chance at least a few ants would find their way there. So, with the number of hunters it required to take out just one, sending multiple strike squads south certainly wasn't overly precautious at all. Multiple other strike squads were stationed to defend national territory, each consisting of one B rank leader, 3 C ranks, then over 10 D and E ranks. They were groups comprised of both active and retired hunters. There were even those who awakened yet chose not to become hunters. All in all, it was a force totaling 5,000, so out of the 50,000 awakened that currently reside in Korea, that meant 1/10 of them showed up to defend their country. A lot of these volunteers are people like the cameraman, who's a good example of someone who awakened yet chose not to become a hunter. They're people who live a normal life due to raids
sleepers,
just
bro.
not being for them. For the main squad
Sleeper hunters.
flying to Jeju Island, Guildmaster Ma was chosen as their leader. He was incredibly honored to be fighting alongside the people he was, because he knew he'd never be able to raid with such capable hunters again. It was while on the helicopter that Cha would ask Beck if he knew why Sung declined, a question to which he obviously said no. When Beck then asked why it was she wanted to know, a rare flustered Cha would answer no reason in particular.
Cause that's her
Shortly
baby
afterwards, when
daddy.
the raid would commence, leading a small
That's
number
her
of
baby
ants to
daddy.
attack the helicopter. Since not every ant was capable of flight, there were only 7 who had come out to meet them. The thing is, Choi's fire wasn't actually enough to kill them. Yes, it was capable of burning away their wings, but the fact it couldn't one-shot them was a little concerning. It showed him that if he really wanted to incinerate them, then a lot more firepower was necessary. These evolved ants were no longer as easy to kill as they were in the last raid. It's then that Choi would jump into the ant tunnels first, clearing all nearby enemies with a massive AoE burst upon landing. As if skydiving hands in pocket wasn't aura enough,
Yeah, like, why are all these characters aura farming? Like, that is their main goal here. Or is it Japan that's doing it, man? Is Japan animating this? Like, they still got a vendetta against the Koreans, like, in the show, like, dead ass. Like, Korea is battling the all the Japanese soldiers in the anime and in the studios. Like, bro, now I hear fireworks. The last time I played with ants was when I was a little boy. I remember hearing faint snapping noises every time I torched an ant with the lighter. Yeah, that's some, little psycho torture shit,
His one-liner after definitely was. So, if you didn't
And he
have
did the glasses thing, too. He fixed the glasses and shit. Like, bro, he is literally trying to R farm every single moment. Hands in the pocket, R farm. Adjusting glasses, telling him giving him a speech, more R farming. What is he gonna do next? If he shows a frame where he's got his hand out and another hand in his pocket, he did the trifecta. That's a hat trick.
appreciation for Choi before, then these two panels together should change that. For the Japan squads who'd been fighting for about 10 minutes now, it was about time to initiate the next phase of their plan, the intended retreat which would send every single ant back into the tunnels. It was right as Goto was about to give the order, though, that Team C's lack of comms would prevent him.
Damn,
There was
bro,
a
he's
chance
just
it
sitting
was
there with no
simply due
head.
to equipment failure, but considering the number of checks done to them beforehand, it was very unlikely that that was what was happening. So, because the order to retreat needed to be relayed to them too, Goto decided to make his way to them himself. If he didn't, proceeding with the plan would likely cause Team C to meet the same fate as the Korean hunters. It was a price Goto knew he couldn't afford, since when considering the subjugation operations that were to happen after this, Team C was far too important. Especially since, aside from Goto, they were composed of Japan's strongest. This is because Team C was positioned closest to the ant tunnel, so it made sense to ensure that they were the most stacked. That being the case, to lose them due to a fault of miscommunication, well, that was a cost which would hurt Japan greatly. Luckily, Goto and Team C had landed relatively close, so with his current speed he figured he could get to them in about 10 minutes. Switching back to the Korean team, for the time being they were relatively safe, with Choi's Flame Prison acting as a shield preventing the re-entry of ants B rank or lower. That meant they could venture deeper without the worry of being flanked from behind. It was a good application of a move typically used to tie up enemies. Inside, the tunnels were incredibly dark, creating for a dungeon experience that was fundamentally different. You see, where usually the insides of gates were lit up by illumination stones, no light here made it difficult to see anything. All they had was Choi's magic and the cameraman's flashlight. So, in addition to facing enemies who had evolved to see in the dark, they themselves could barely see anything. It was an added layer of difficulty that made things harder. Now, with Choi having no choice but to lead the group, it was Ma's job as leader and tank to stand right next to him. His normal outgoing behavior was nowhere to be seen though, as every ounce of focus was spent observing their surroundings. The same could be said for Beck as well, since ever since entering the tunnels he hadn't said a word. He was now using his Eyes of the Beast to detect even the slightest changes of magical energy. The only hunter who remained the same way they always were was Cha with her typical calm, composed attitude.
That was a good touch. Like, her jumping on her blade to give it more force to cut. That's good thinking right there. That's good thinking.
It was once they arrived at the egg chamber that the ants they fought here were simply the nursery guards. They were lesser evolved versions of the ants that were now the Queen's Guards. This brings us back to the Japanese side, where Goto would arrive at Team C's massacre. The novel didn't describe how said massacre happened, but when compared to the manhwa, the anime was a perfect execution of their executions. Now, you might be wondering how it is Kenzo got injured before this, but it was simply because the ants were more organized than he thought. By attacking with military tactics and flying in a battle formation, the intelligence they exhibited was far beyond what he was expecting. It was another example highlighting the ants' crazy evolution. Now, it was in the novel that Team C actually had 5 S-ranks, since the overall strike force was all 20 of Japan's S-rank hunters. That being the case, the fact all 5 were killed regardless made their executions all the more worrying. Their bodies didn't indicate any sort of battle either, so where Goto's teammates assumed it was a fight involving multiple ants, Goto immediately knew it was one. The lack of ant corpses made such a conclusion clear. Their eaten heads also indicated the same cause of death, so when combining that with the fact that this was the work of only one monster, the conclusion Goto came to was that this had to have been done by the raid boss. He would then call headquarters and—
Damn, he what did he do? Like burn his body, or he ate the rest of his body? Did you see that?
Came to was that this had to have been done by the raid
Like that's his rib cage, ain't it?
boss. He would then call headquarters and ask for the location of the queen, wanting to confirm whether his suspicion was true or not. You see, with Japan being one of 3 countries possessing a satellite equipped with magic energy detection technologies, it was very easy to pinpoint where exactly the queen was whenever they wanted. It was when headquarters revealed the queen was still in the tunnels that Goto would panic and order every Japanese hunter off the island immediately. Reason being that the annihilation of 5 of their best hunters from one unknown enemy was far beyond any of their expectations. Yes, they did plan for all sorts of possibilities and variables, but whatever this was far past the scope of any of it. That's when Goto would remember something odd reported to him 4 months ago, involving the Ant Queen and a change in her power levels. Since she was being monitored 24/7, Japan was able to clearly see when its energy levels changed. That being the case, when a massive decline in her emissions was detected almost 4 months ago, Japan's best researchers deemed this the Queen's lifespan coming to its end. With its detected magical energy less than half of what it usually was, this was the only conclusion they could come to.
And this is everything that you don't know, because the anime does not do any justice to giving any backstory about anybody. Like, they ain't saying nothing about the queen at all. None of that. They ain't talking about none of that queen power level going down. And what I was going to assume was that the queen's power level went down because she was giving birth to that monstrosity, right? She was giving birth to that monstrosity. And then it took all of her power, like most of it.
1 month was all it took for the Queen's levels to return back to normal though, so with researchers now stumped with regards to what this was, Goto couldn't help but think perhaps that was related to this. So, it was as he wondered more about who this mysterious enemy was that the Korean team would be dealing with the remnants of guards before the boss room. Min had given buffs tailored to each of his party members, so that gave a better idea of what each member's role was. Most did make sense given each member's known abilities, but some of you might be shocked to see Cha with more of a bruiser type buff. Considering how she was the main tank for her own guild, it made sense to give her a boost in both offense and defense.
She's a tank?
We'll see come more into play in the boss room. For any ants that did get past the front line right now, Min was more than capable of handling them himself. Yes, being a healer did mean his combat skills weren't the greatest, but when compared to other hunters, they were still at the A rank level. It was more than enough power to handle at least 1 or 2 ants. 5 minutes was all it took to handle the second wave of ants before the boss room, mostly because Cha's buff made her way more efficient. Where before she was slaying the same number of ants as everyone else, now she was killing double what Beck was. It gave the squad a lot more time to work with. Since getting here took about 15 minutes from landing, that left about 30 minutes to kill the boss then evacuate. They needed to leave extra time to make it back to the point from which they entered from. It was once the team got close to the boss room that Beck would sense only 8 guards and the queen. There wasn't a whole army like how we saw in the anime, but rather these 9 lone targets making the battle a lot more intimate.
See, they had 8 guards. And it didn't even look like they was guarding nothing. They had 8 guards, 8 ant guards, like royal guards. That should have been hands. They just made them look like nothing. They just made them look like a bunch of ants, for real.
Part of the reason this is important to note is because a specific strategy was come up with to deal with them. You see, with each guard being as strong as an S rank, tanking all of them simply wasn't possible. If they were gonna take these ants on properly, then a secondary tank was needed to draw aggro from the Queen's guards. So, given that Cha was the main tank for her own guild, it made sense to set her as the secondary tank.
Okay, I do remember that. I do remember him like taking point, and then he had like that big shield that he brought out. But I'm expecting the ants to have some kind of like, they talked about how they were intelligent and they used like different battle tactics, and that's how that dude got hurt. You know what I'm saying? Like that dude in the Japanese squad, he had that giant slash on his trap, right? It's like, how come we didn't see like no intelligent fighting from the ants here? It was really just like, we have you surrounded and we're just gonna use our numbers. Like that doesn't Yeah, I guess that's a good tactic, but if they're the royal guard, I want to see them like blocking their attacks back. You know, if they're like supposed to be S rank, like you can't be an S rank character and you know what I'm saying, and be dumb as like dumb as rocks, right? Like you can't be, I don't know, man. It's like if you're an S rank, I'm assuming like you're great at whatever stat you're at and you have some kind of brains. You know what I'm saying? Like you gotta have some kind of brains to have gotten to an S. You can't just be an S just alone on talent. You gotta have some kind of like, you know what I'm saying, like battle sense.
She would be the primary guard while Ma preoccupied the queen. This led her to engage with a skill called Tremor of Provocation, which, as an AoE taunt, drew aggro from all the guards and the queen.
There we go.
Ma would then use his own Battle Cry of Provocation, which, unlike Cha's skill, was a single target taunt drawing attention from only the queen. So, with the guards and queen now split, all Ma had to do was endure. He simply stood tall and prayed his efforts were enough to protect both himself and his colleagues.
And they did a good job of showing, you know, whenever Jinwoo popped up, I know I'm getting ahead of it. You know, this was episode 12. I know I'm getting ahead of myself. But in 12, you know, Jinwoo, he used iron to provoke, you know, and draw aggro from all the other ants too. But they showed it, like they animated that like a little bit better, you know? Like they just didn't really show these S ranks like as nothing. They just kind of showed how worthless they were. You know, it's like, I think the only good attack that the Ant Queen did was that poison.
It was at this point the
That was like the
cameraman
best
would
attack
step up,
the
but
Ant
Min's
Queen did.
forceful pullback was a lot stronger than he expected. To add to why Min did that, it was essentially because no one was responsible for keeping the cameraman safe other than himself. With the boss fight now well underway, not a single hunter had time to look out for him anymore. So, this was a message to which the cameraman had zero response to, but he was thrown back.
Did solo leveling copy Hunter x Hunter? In a way, yeah, you can argue that they did. Solo leveling has taken like inspiration from, I want to say, every single anime when it comes to its like animating its fights and the story. Like they've taken inspiration from every anime and made their own thing, you know? So
backed by just how powerful Min seemed. Though physically he was the weakest S rank, not only did his aura completely overwhelm his own, but his strength was many levels greater as well. It made clear the difference between an S rank and an A rank. This brings us to a scene I was pretty surprised they didn't include, since it does well to showcase the far-reaching impact of Jeju Island across the country. Meet Grandma and Grandpa, an old couple where one's interested in the raid and the other not. Grandpa used to be highly interested in all things related to Jeju Island, but lately he found himself apart from it. The reason he was so invested before was because the day the gate first broke there was the day he lost his only son. It was an event that caused him to become a massive supporter of hunters too, since what other way was there to avenge his son than help the people he could? So, for years, Grandpa would donate lots of money to the Hunter Association, filling his heart with anticipation that this raid would be the one to avenge him. He was so caught up in seeing it happen that in the days before the raid he couldn't even sleep. This, of course, filled him with high expectations too, but the more eager he was, the bigger the disappointment when those raids ultimately ended in failure. So, it was during the third raid that the news would say all the things that they were saying now, leading Grandpa to feel like he was betrayed since it all turned out to be a lie. The reporters always said how the raid was going to work this time, but with each attempt, the outcome was always the same. Eventually, Grandpa would stop talking about hunters altogether, as he had stopped expecting the one thing he wanted most from them. To him, the subjugation of the ants was a dream long gone now. It's the reason why he's so grumpy here, and it's also why he's so emotionally invested shortly after. It was before he would have this change of heart, though, that Grandma would show her faith all the way through. She never gave up hope that these hunters could avenge their son. She did feel bad that such young people were seen getting injured, but she also cheered whenever they made progress. Like, with each Queensguard the team took out, both her and the neighbors around her could all be heard yelling. It was a sentiment of hope shared across the entire country. It was when only 2 guards were left that's when Grandpa would join her, showing nothing but anticipation for the success of the hunters currently fighting. Both were overcome with emotion as they reminisced of the last memory they had with their son. It was a celebration for the job he'd just secured over at Jeju Island. So, this scene may not seem like much, but what it does give is an inside view into the perspective of the everyday person. Last episode, Chairman Go was worried about the diminishing faith in the Hunter Association, and this right here was the scene to prove
This is valid.
that notion that an entire nation was depending on them was really made clear. Now, for the sole TV station that was reporting the raid, its audience rating had reached a new viewership record of 85%. For context on how much that was, even if South Korea was to reach the finals of the World Cup tomorrow, no studio would even come close to that. Everyone was way more interested in the country about to become one of the few who've successfully cleared an S-rank gate. With only America, China, Russia, and France completing one before, this Korea-Japan team was about to become the 7th to ever do so. So, given how rare of an occurrence this was, the director couldn't help but think about all the money he was about to make. That's when the howling screech could be heard from his feed, along with an update regarding the alarming news that the Japan teams were withdrawing. This brings us to the fight with the Queen herself, which honestly the anime did better than both. They added quite a lot to Cha's scenes, and the panels which the manhwa depicted beautifully were brought to life as best they probably could. I do still like to appreciate how amazing the manhwa looks though.
Yeah.
It was after getting healed from the acid attack that Ma would activate the defense skill Advanced Fortification, enabling him to endure the Queen's attacks easily now. The rest would jump in and force the Queen into a corner, leading Beck to see that this was it for her. His instincts revealed exactly how she felt up until the screech happened. It was once the fight was over that the novel and anime would show this brief moment of celebration, but in the manhwa there was no such time for that. As soon as the Queen was dead, the Ant King would be there shortly after. It was right before it showed up though that Hunter Ma would get the call confirming the Japan team's withdrawal. Immediately, everyone began to assume this situation was futile, since if 20 S-rank hunters couldn't even hold off the ants for 30 minutes, then how could the 6 of them fend off an entire army indefinitely? It was a bad situation turned worse when he showed up.
It was all a trap to begin with, so it's like, damn, what do you do there? They don't even know. They didn't even know it was a trap. But I feel like Sung's probably going to tell them, after this is all said and done, that, you know, Japan had not so good intentions when it came to, you know, this whole mission, and it backfired, like, to the worst case scenario type of backfire.
With the Ant King's footsteps sending shivers down their spine, the hunters present could only stare in awe at it. Cha would be the first to recognize something was incredibly wrong, since for a monster so ominous, she couldn't sense its presence at all. The Ant King was a being she could only sense with her eyes. This was a discrete level of power she'd only ever felt once before, and that was from Sung himself.
That's crazy, bro.
So, as she stared listlessly at the oppressive aura this Ant King emanated, she could only imagine fighting it was akin to facing off against Sung. It was a fearsome thought that caused her to shudder and restricted her breathing. Ma, as the leader, needed to make a quick decision here, but as logical as it was to just fight the monster, a strong sense of unease prevented him from giving the order. It was when he finally overcame every basic instinct telling him to run that the Ant King had already gotten behind him.
Dude, the Ant King looks so good in the manhwa. It looks so good.
In a flash, it moved to the Queen without a
Look at him, bro. He looks cool as like, the colors look so much better on him.
Hunter noticing. It was speed that confirmed this was in fact a threat unlike any they'd ever faced before. So, it didn't simply walk like how we saw in the anime, and it didn't eat the Ant Queen either. It instead roared so menacingly it brought everyone to their knees. It's not clear whether this was an attack or not, but the sheer intensity of it was enough to paralyze everyone. Only Cha remained standing, albeit just barely. That's when the Ant King would choose to focus her, striking her on the side of the head and rendering her unconscious. The rest of the fight is depicted very faithfully to the manhwa, but does differ slightly when it comes to the novel. So, as shocking as it was to see Cha removed from the fight instantly, every hunter present knew the longer they hesitated, the less likely.
Yeah, this nigga right here, he sold so hard, bro. He sold out the healer so bad, dude. Like, this ant was already chewing on people's heads and gaining intelligence, and then you want to sit there and blab that he won't be able to do the damage that he could do because they got a healer, a S rank healer that's on their side. He sold
It
so
was for
hard.
them to survive.
He sold
It
so
was a
hard.
mindset that led Ma to grab the Ant King with a bear hug, restricting its movements until his opponent would sever his arms from the inside. It was then Beck knew he had to intervene, because to not do so now meant Ma would have been killed right there. This forced the Ant King to switch his targets, defeating everyone until Ma would enter again. Turns out the others had been healed too, so every hunter minus Cha got to get a beatdown a second time. It was once Ma had returned for the third that finally the Ant King would clue into the existence of a healer. You see, Min's camouflage was working perfectly. The Ant King truly had no idea where he was, but now that
Yo, dude, that tank sold him out so bad, dude. Sold him out so
he
bad.
knew Min was around, there were several ideas it had to work around it, one of which was to use Ma as bait. So, the Ant King decided to constantly damage him by giving him the Loki treatment, but held back just
Yup.
enough in order to keep him alive. That way, it would look as if he was about to kill him, forcing Min to have to heal Ma over and over again. This created for a constant output of healing magic, from which the Ant King could then pinpoint Min's location. You see, small bursts made it impossible to hone in on where it was coming from, but a steady stream of magic would eventually become perceptible to anyone. This would be how the Ant King found Min,
And he couldn't
ultimately
move,
leading
right?
to his death.
He couldn't move.
Eating his head then allowed it to gain Min's strength and knowledge, which is a topic I'll actually cover in an extra cut content video.
Ooh, I wanna think too that ant, whenever he eats people, he can probably gain their ability as well. When he ate the healer's head, he gained the ability to regenerate himself too. I got it. That is a good predict right there.
The way this monster became the Ant King is actually a small side topic of its own. Now, it was when the Ant King asked Beck where the Human King was that in the novel Beck would straight up out Goto and say he was outside. As cowardly as it
Hold up. Alright.
was, Beck had no choice but to use Goto as a means to buy time for him and his teammates. Now, considering how the outcome of Goto's fight is still inconclusive, I'll wait till next week to talk about how that went. If you're wondering why Goto decided to call himself the king though, you'd be surprised to know it wasn't entirely out of hubris. It was actually a firm belief that stemmed out of a position he planned to hold in the future. Since Japan's true plans were to subjugate Korea and create an empire, Goto knew the only viable person to assume that throne was him. So when he really thought about
I am
what
the
it was
captain.
the Ant King was asking, Goto had no problem confirming he was the king. To him, he had every right to say he was. It was only a matter of time before such a position was solidified as truth. At least, that's what he thought anyway. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this episode. Don't forget to check out the solo leveling merch and
Check
be
out the
sure to
merch.
subscribe if you want to see more. Until next time though, ciao.
Yo. So yeah. All the positives that came out of, that episode was the fact that the Japan hunters, bro, spit it out. The Japan hunters, they definitely got what they deserve. What I hope for is that Jinwoo got enough intel and proof so that way he could show Chairman Go that they were up to no good and had planned on betraying them during the whole raid. Those seem like good things that could happen that they probably won't put in, but that's too important of a detail for the anime to not throw in there. I don't know if it's in the manhwa or the light novel because I have not watched it or read it, but they should put that in there, maybe for season 3 or in the next episode, since it's supposedly supposed to be a 1-hour special. We're gonna need a lot of information to piece everything together that's going on right after Jinwoo saves Cha by using Biru's abilities to regenerate on her. And I'm throwing that as a predict right here, right now, and I will clip this and throw it into my next reaction later on. Because I feel like I'm on point with that one. I feel like I'm on point. If it wasn't so obvious as to whenever he turned around and looked at him. He turned around and looked at him.